Marcie Erickson joins us right now, in fact. We're very honored to have her on the show today. Marcie, how you doing? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you
Oh,
so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you.
absolutely. Thanks so much for being here. I have a little secret for you. We wanted you to come in and to talk about what's near and dear to your heart, the situation in Ethiopia. But it really fits into a theme that we've been playing with a lot here in the Remnant Underground, which is the picking and choosing of hotspots in the world over which our friends in the media are concerned. So there's the politicization of persecution is what I'm talking about. And I remember when the Ukraine war first started, and we first got into that one. And at that time, there was already some video available that we used on our show down here 2.5 years ago, however long it's been, about Ethiopia. And so I thought, boy, it's been a long time. I mean, even then, they weren't really talking about what was going on. 300,000 displaced people in Ethiopia. Nobody, as you know, nobody knows about this because it's not popular on Fox News or whatever to talk about this particular hotspot. I find that to be really unfair, especially with the various hotspots that are going on right now in Israel and so forth. The media telling people who to care about and then ignoring entire other demographics that are suffering serious persecution is a massive injustice. And so I wanted to kind of recruit you a little bit because you're such an expert on this particular hotspot to kind of catch us up a little bit. So this audience can at least be proficient or have a much better understanding of what's happening in Ethiopia. So to get there, so that's the long story short here by way of introduction. To get there, I wonder if I could ask you to presume absolute ignorance in this audience about Ethiopia. Let's just start right from the beginning. Where is it, first of all? Where is Ethiopia?
So yeah, of course. And I feel the same way, like what you had just said about people picking and choosing. And, we all are created by the same God. And so we should have that level of compassion no matter where the person is in the world. Ethiopia is located in Northeast Africa. It borders, it's actually landlocked, even though it wasn't for many years. But over the last, I believe, 30 or 40 years, it became landlocked. It borders Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and Eritrea. So it's not far from the sea, but it's still landlocked.
So we're talking northeastern Africa.
Northeast.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, also from our audience is primarily Christian, obviously, and I think it might be of interest to some to know how long Christianity has been in Ethiopia. It's one of the first places, I think, outside of the Holy Land where Christianity really took root. Do you have any information about that, like the general attitude towards Christianity, the history of Christianity in Ethiopia?
Yeah, absolutely. Ethiopia is primarily still Orthodox Christian, Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. And they believe that started during the time of Christ. They believe that Jesus actually visited them. So not necessarily the eunuch the story that we know about the Ethiopian eunuch bringing the gospel back, but they believe that Jesus was with them. So they believe that it goes back to that time. And it's a very interesting church, very rich in tradition. And some of their feast days, the largest feast days of the year, are so wonderful and beautiful. People, for example, the cross of Jesus was brought to Ethiopia, and they celebrate this day. And it's in the end of September every year, and it's a 3-day celebration. And so it's amazing. Everyone shuts down everything for 3 days, and they walk with their churches to the center of the city, and where they hear sermons and sing and celebrate for 3 days. And it's thousands and thousands of people in the area where we live. And it's just, it's absolutely phenomenal. Now, with that said, when I first went to Ethiopia in the year 2000, it was about 15% Muslim. And now it's well over 60% Muslim in the country overall. Our area is still primarily Orthodox Christian with a collection of some Muslims and also some Catholics and Protestant Christians. That's pretty much the makeup of where we're located. But there's other areas of Ethiopia where it went from being almost no Muslims to 85, 90% Muslim.
Okay, and I don't know if this is getting too far in the weeds, but I'm so curious because it's information that's important for us to have. Was it truly a Christian country until 1974?
Oh yeah,
That
I'm
long?
sure. Yeah.
That's amazing. So what begins to happen then to the Christian identity in Ethiopia from those early 1970s moving forward? Is that a communist takeover, or what goes on there?
Yes, yes, there was a communist takeover, and there continues to be a lot of corruption. And there is a lot of, when I was talking to people that converted to becoming Muslim, they said that they would see people come back from these Muslim countries or come in from these Muslim countries, and they had so much money and wealth that they felt that this was their way to obtain wealth. So it wasn't so much about belief or religion. And, when I started talking to them about the person of Christ and who he is and how he is the only, we believe in the only God that pursued humanity and loves people. And that always changes hearts. It really affects them. But it is still, I feel, especially with the area where we live, that it is still primarily Orthodox or is still primarily Christian.
So this is interesting because I saw a stat that I wanted to see if to have you confirm for me. It says something like at this point, it's only about 1% of Ethiopians are Catholic, but 90 something, high 90s% of the mission work is provided by the Catholic Church. Is that still an accurate?
That would probably be accurate. Yes. Um, yes, because the for example, if you have a Catholic school, that doesn't mean that they teach catechism. It means that it's a private school. And so all of the people, government officials, or people that can afford to send their children to a good school will choose the Catholic school because they know that they'll get a good education. Now, when I grew up, if you went to a Christian or a Catholic school, there was requirements for doing catechism, for learning different things. And that I have not seen that to be the case in Ethiopia. I could be wrong. There could be some places that are doing it. But what we were able to do was open our school. And within our school, we're able to teach from the Bible. And as long as we are not infringing on, the belief of the Orthodox Church, then we've been able to do this peacefully without a problem. And we do have some Muslim students, but they know that they are going to hear about Jesus Christ in school, and they are going to learn. They're going to learn the Bible as well as songs that are religious.
So I'm curious. I have a book here that's your book, which I'm sure you this is from 2017. I don't know if it's still available. I hope it is because it's fantastic. But
Thank you.
I wanted to point out that like this your story in here is so exciting to me because sometimes Catholics get you're a Roman Catholic, I understand, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Born and raised.
And sometimes we have the reputation of we talk the talk, but we don't really want to walk the walk too much. From what I can tell, and I haven't read this book cover to cover, but I've gone through it. I mean, you've been walking the walk for a long time. Even to the point of being there most of your life in Ethiopia, adopting 3 or 4 children, and then getting married and having your own children, ended up with 12 children, which is absolutely wonderful. But I wonder if you could tell us what is it about Ethiopia that's not only attracted your attention, but caused you to pretty much devote your life to helping there and being a very strong Catholic witness, Christian witness in a country that's had a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because when I first was praying about what God wanted me to do with my life when I was a senior in high school, I said a prayer asking God if he wanted me to go to college or become a religious sister. That's what I thought were my options. And I heard a voice say, "Neither I want you to become a missionary." And I had never met a missionary. I didn't know what that entailed. And in my mind, I saw Africa. And I ended up, my first mission placement at 18 was actually in Guatemala at a children's home. And then at 19, I went through an organization that had missions set up in, I think, about 86 different countries throughout the world. And I just said, send me somewhere in Africa. And they sent me to Ethiopia. That was the year 2000. I was 19 years old at the time. So people can do the math if they want to know how old I am now. But it was a very, very, very difficult year when I was there. It was in the middle of a 5-year famine. Every day there were hundreds of people that were literally starving to death and at the gates. And the place where I was working, they had a school. They didn't have an orphanage. They had a feeding program. But even though they didn't have an orphanage, there were a lot of times babies left on the ground at the end of the day. It was just the most heartbreaking and difficult experience. And when I left Ethiopia after that first year, I actually cried because I thought I would never be back there. I just really felt like it was too difficult of a place for me to live. And I went to college for a few years, but really felt like God was when he called me to be a missionary, I really felt like that was a lifelong call, that wasn't something I could just do for 2 years. And so in the midst of being in the United States in college, I realized that I needed to go back. And so I thought God was calling me to Kenya. So I ended up in Kenya and absolutely loved Kenya. And the main thing that I felt like the Lord was calling me to do at that point was to adopt and foster care for as many children as I could personally take on. So I thought that over the course of 20 years, I would maybe care for 20 to 30 children and raise them and live in Kenya with them, for example. When I arrived in Kenya, I realized that they would never let me adopt as a single woman. So I thought, well, maybe I'm not meant to be in Kenya. Maybe the Lord's not calling me to Kenya. And so I ended up getting these invitations to go to all these different countries in Africa. I would just meet people, they'd say, "Oh, I have a project here in Uganda. Can you come work with us?" "Oh, yeah, sure. Why not?" And so I went by bus to all these different countries in Africa. Yeah, Uganda, Rwanda, Congo, Tanzania, and then I ended up back in Ethiopia. And by this time, it had been about 5 years since the first time I ended up back in Kenya. And by this time, it had been 5 years since I had been in Ethiopia. And I thought, let me go back to Ethiopia and just visit my students and see how things are going. And I went back to Ethiopia, and God made it very, very evident and clear that that was where He wanted me. And so then I began praying about where specifically in Ethiopia. And then He made it very clear that He wanted me in this particular city called Bahir Dar. And so I began there in 2006. And, like you said, I started off by receiving my first 3 children. And I always prayed for my future husband or my future children. And I just didn't know which one the Lord would bring me first, because I always knew that I wanted to adopt and do foster care for those children. So I received my son Tariku when he was 2 years and 9 months old. And 3 weeks later, I received James, who was 13 days old. And 3 weeks later, I received Amanu, who was 3 months old. And I just felt, overwhelmed with having 3 children, that when more people kept coming to my gate saying, "Can you please take another child?" I thought, I realized I can't take every child, but I know that God has a plan and a purpose for every child. And so that's when God gave me the vision for Grace Center. And, I said a very simple prayer about needing people to help me start. And I had some friends that were living in Ethiopia at the time. And before I even finished telling them this vision that God gave me of this center where these people could receive proper love and care, they said they would move up and help me start. And so God answered that prayer in less than 5 minutes. And we began with about 5 foster children. And now we serve roughly over 50,000 individuals where we live in Ethiopia.
50,000. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is really exciting. So when you say mission, walk me through that a little bit. What does it mean for a lay person, a lay family to operate a mission? Or what is it? How does the physical and the spiritual how does that handled?
That's a very good question, because I'm actually, as far as I know, I'm the only one doing that in Ethiopia that is not a priest or religious sister. I know that there are different families that do volunteer for different, specifically religious orders, but I can attribute that to a dear friend of mine who happens to be our bishop in Bahir Dar. Before he was our bishop, when we were connected to the Diocese of Addis Ababa, he was the first priest that I spoke to and said, "Where do you need help in Ethiopia? Where would be a place where you think that I should start receiving children, raising children?" And he was the one that said, "Go to this town, this city." And so I didn't realize this until years later, but he took the chance, he took the risk and said, "Okay, this woman has a bigger vision than I had thought when I first began, meeting her and speaking with her." And he took the risk and said, "Just let her be, let her continue." And I didn't realize at the time, but there was actually a priest in particular that I had been working with that kept going to the bishop saying, "Can we tell her to stop? Can we please tell her to stop?" And he said, "No, let her be, let her be." And our project just continued to explode based off of the fact that God knows every person in the world. And when we say yes and we're obedient to him, then he can provide for them. And this is one of the very unique things about what we do in Ethiopia at Grace Center is that we really say yes to any person who's genuinely in need that comes to us. And as far as I know, the other programs that I worked with all throughout Africa, they had numbers of people. They would say, "We will help feed 100 people. We will help house 30 people." But if you get to that 31, then they would say, "Oh, no, no, we can't do that. We said that we would do 30." And I feel like God is so much bigger than that. And we need to take him out of that box, that so many put him in. But I think the main thing when it comes to, if there were a family or an individual that is feeling called and led into missions is to find organizations that, fit the charism of what they feel called to do. And spend some time volunteering with them and talk to them. We do have a number of people that come over as volunteers, and we're right down the street from the Catholic Church. So there isn't always daily mass because the priests are very few and they have to travel to many different areas. But it's a beautiful group of people. There's some religious sisters that live in the area as well. So I would encourage people, if they feel that the Lord's calling them to something different than what they had experienced, don't ignore that. Because I think our world would look very, very different if everyone heard that call and heeded that call.
I agree. I found I was paging through your book, and I saw some of the photos were so touching, and one really stands out to me. You're talking to a group of young girls, children, and they're holding your hand and they want to kiss your hand, and you say you feel undeserving of the love that you give. And I've only been to Africa once recently, this past summer. And it was interesting, the American perception of racism that we just sort of project. It must be this way all over the world. And I was so beautifully and pleasantly surprised in Africa to simply not see that anywhere. It seems like the racism thing is almost an American product in a way that's exported for a reason. I don't know, is that your experience there? Judging by what I see from your work, it seems like it's almost a non-issue there.
Absolutely. The people are, they see the heart. They really do see the heart. And you might get people yelling Ferengi, which is white person, but they're just doing it because they're curious. They're just not used to seeing someone. But I know which photo you're talking about, and I almost didn't put that in the book because I really felt so undeserving. Many of the people, when we help them, they drop to the ground and they try to kiss our feet or kiss our knees, and it's like we're so not deserving of that. But they're trying to show how much they realize that many of them wouldn't be alive if we hadn't been willing to say, "Yes, we'll help you. Yes, we'll give you food." But yeah, that racism thing that is so American, it's so disheartening and it's very sad. And we explain it to some of our staff in Ethiopia and they don't get it. They just say, "So you have division between this and that and why?" They just don't have any idea why that exists.
Yeah, I wonder if you, without getting into too much controversy, it seemed, I went to a couple of Catholic missions in Tanzania, and I was really surprised. The missionary priest who was taking our little group around, showing us his operation, He would say, like, this young man's working on the stained glass windows of Our Lady and the Saints. He's Muslim. This man over here is working on building the steeple. He's Muslim as well. And he would say, like, we expect that maybe someday, we're always trying to encourage him to come to Christ, but there's no urgency. And I thought, well, so the relationship between Muslim and Christian is such that Muslim families are actually putting their children in Christian schools, Christian missionary schools. This flies right in the face of what Americans feel, and I think, again, is a propagandistic movement going on here to say all Muslims hate Christians and nowhere in the world are they getting along, and therefore support the war effort because you got to get rid of this blight. But boy, I don't know. I'd like you to, if you can, with that, if that isn't too controversial, to say something about that, because my experience there was just the opposite. There seemed to be almost a beautiful relationship, working relationship between the two religions. Is that it? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I think there's a split. We do see the extremism. The majority of the Muslims are not in that category. But we have had different terrorist activities perpetrated by Muslims against Christians. For example, there was one Muslim leader who called people to surround the churches on Sunday mornings. And when the Christians were leaving church, they were ordered to decapitate the people, to be able to remove the crosses from their necks. And so we have seen that. We've seen that even where we live in our city. But the day-to-day relationship is that we know many, many, many Muslim families that are very good people, very nice people, very kind. And we look at them, in a similar way that someone who just doesn't know, maybe they don't have any knowledge of the Bible. And it's interesting because one of the big places that we had helped a number of years ago was a little neighborhood that was a group of squatters that had basically taken over this neighborhood, and they were living in conditions that were horrific. And we went in there, and because of the fact that we had sent their children to school, we had sponsored their children to go to school, they allowed us to come into this neighborhood. Otherwise, the first time I went in, they didn't realize that I was the one sending their children to school, so they tried to stone me and get me out of the neighborhood. And so, but once I went back with someone from that village, and she walked in and she explained to them, no, this is that person that's actually, sending your children to school. Oh, come. And they showed us their houses, but they were living in such terrible, terrible conditions, no access to water. So we helped them build houses and have access to water. And the amazing thing was that once they saw that we really loved them as human beings and as people, they were very open to hearing about our God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I would be able to pray with people on their deathbeds. And, it was a very interesting and amazing experience seeing people say, oh, yeah, I could definitely agree with you on all of these things. And so I think a lot of people are Muslim by birth. A lot of people are Muslim, like I said before, because they think it's best for their family, that they might not suffer as much with poverty and sickness and starvation. And so you have these pockets of people that are the extremists, which is what the media always points to. And then you have the majority, which are just not. But at the same time, I do feel like there is an urgency, because I feel like we just don't know how much longer things are going to go on the way they're going on. I do feel like there is an urgency to try to share more with people about Christ and try to help them come to that realization sooner than just saying, oh, they're here working on our buildings. But again, I don't know the situations in the area where you are. Maybe it is primarily Muslim. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Where you were in Tanzania, correct?
Right.
Such a beautiful beautiful place.
And these young guys that were helping out were like students. They were interested in the whole mission project. They weren't just hired. And I mean, I'm trying to just figure it out because I feel like, again, the media is polarizing us to really a dangerous point now where there's just that they really want us to be at each other's throats. So, for example, we have this thing called the Catholic Identity Conference. We had one of the bishops from Nigeria come and speak at that, and he could obviously speak to the persecution that's going on. But he also, as you're doing, he also was able to speak to the love and on the ground the reality of being able to try to not be polarized like this. I noticed just the other day with the situation in Syria, which is really getting bad now, where there are a lot of Christians dying, exactly as some of us predicted. But Muslims and Christians got together to protest what's happening to the Christians as well. So I'm interested in that as almost as an aside, and maybe that brings me to my next question for you, because you haven't. I understand you're going back to Ethiopia very soon, but it's been difficult for you you haven't been able to be there for a couple of years now. What would you say is that? Is that a civil war? Is that a religious war? What's going on there that prevented you from going back?
So, yeah, we haven't been able to be there for 2 years. And prior to that, there was a war with a different people group in the north. It's really more like a genocide than a war. The people where we live were caught completely unaware, and this happened about a year and a half ago. And all of a sudden, just thousands were killed. I mean, within 24 to 48 hours. It was absolutely horrific. I was not there at the time. I had already been in the U.S. for some months prior to that, so we ended up staying. But we know people personally that were killed at that time. And it's just been an ongoing battle. A lot of people were also rounded up even prior to this and placed in what I think are concentration camps, work camps or concentration camps. They just say they're being arrested, but it wasn't like these were criminals. These were just women walking down the street. And we know some people personally that were in that situation as well. And so there's been this very difficult time for the people there where they have been struggling just for survival. Dodging bullets, and it's been quite heartbreaking. Despite this, we have just seen God's protection. We pray for his hedge of protection every day. And, for example, there was a building that was taken over that was right next to Grance Center. And we were able to get a hold of someone that had taken over the building and talk to someone. Our assistant director who's in Ethiopia was able to do this. And he said, please do not shoot down, because if you shoot down, you're shooting into a building that's holding 30 babies and our staff. And they said, okay, we'll honor it. And they didn't. We've never had a bullet come into the center.
Wait a minute.
Now,
I've got to stop you there, because that's truly a dramatic account. So your buildings have actually been drawn into this conflict. To the point.
Well, our location, because of the location, there is a building behind us that's a taller building. And so these people were using this building as a place to shoot people from.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
And so this building has off and on been taken over by these people. And so, and forgive me, I'm not saying more information because I have to make sure that I'm very protective of our organization. And so, and very protective of the people there more than anything. But if your listeners want information on details of who's who, they can easily do like a deep search and find information. In fact, I used to tell people, if you want to really know, go to the Twitter X page for the U.S. Embassy in Ethiopia and read the comments below. And you'll start to get an idea of what is actually happening. So, you'll see a post from the embassy, but you read all the comments and you'll see some information. But I'm sure there's many other places that you can find out information. But because this building in particular is a higher range of site, it was being taken over. And because of that, it became a target for other things. And so we've had 4 times where grenades were thrown right at the back of Grace Center at this building, and God has miraculously protected everyone. And one time was during the day, all the kids were in school, and they actually thought that it had hit within our buildings because it was just so loud. And our staff ran around to check everyone and make sure everyone was okay. And then they realized it was that particular building behind. And even in that building, people were not harmed, as far as I know. So it's been this really amazing, interesting, eye-opening experience of seeing really God's protection when we do pray fervently for it. And almost this picture in my mind of, I feel like angels' wings just in a dome. You know, we talk about these domes that are going to protect us from missiles. Well, I think angels' wings are going to be more powerful than any dome that we could build. And so that's what we see.
Do you have a figure approximately? I know you can't get into identifying the various groups, or you shouldn't. Wouldn't want to ask you to do that. But how many people would you say have lost their lives in Ethiopia over the past 10 years? Is there an
Oh gosh, there's no way to know. Yeah. I mean, this particular conflict has been going on, you know, for a year and a half, and prior to that, it was the people further north. I mean, I think millions, because, and I think people would be shocked if they knew. I mean, we're talking mass graves. I've seen things personally that people would have a hard time. Just, it's just very challenging and very, very sad. But there's so many people. We estimated that when this conflict first began, there are about 2,000, we think, just in our surrounding area. So just in our neighborhood and surrounding, that were killed within those first couple days, day or two. We know someone personally that counted over 90 bodies in a park, where people were just sitting in a park in the afternoon, enjoying the sun, eating their lunch, whatever they might be doing. And another person we were talking to was counting over the phone. We said, what are you doing? He said, I'm counting how many bullets hit my house over the last couple days. And it was, I think, 15 just on his house. And so these are people all surrounding where we're at. And we're in a city that's about 500,000 people.
And would you say the people who are dying, are they all religions, all skin colors? Is there any division there, or is it just kind of a general?
It's a tribal issue.
Okay.
So most of them are from a specific group.
Okay.
But it crosses religions and beliefs and everything like that.
So what do you think then is the reason? It sounds like it's almost bordering on something as bad as the Rwandan situation from back in the 90s. Why is there such a media blackout on Ethiopia?
That's a good question. I think that Ethiopia is a place with a very rich history, but I think people have a very negative view of history in Ethiopia. I think the Ethiopian people overall are very proud people, in a good way. They want their country to be seen as a beautiful, wonderful place, and it is. It is a beautiful place, beautiful people, beautiful landscape. So they're doing things like fixing up the city and making the city look amazing and beautiful, while the rural areas, like where we're at, even though we're in a city, we're still very many miles away from the capital city. They're ignoring the plights of the people and making it unlivable. And this has been going on for many, many years. And though I don't know necessarily why it's not being covered by the media, except to say that the media tends to not cover a lot of things. Maybe there's no advantage to them with these specific people. But it's interesting because the previous war that was a bit further north that I think you commented on in the beginning of our talk that you had found information about, that one was pretty widely covered. But this is a very particular group of people that they were the ruling tribe in Ethiopia for many, many years. So the Ethiopian history is such that Queen of Sheba, which was known as Sheba, her name was known as Sheba. She went to visit Solomon in the Old Testament, and we know how she was very wealthy. She brought many things, and the main thing she wanted was wisdom from Solomon. So then she ended up conceiving and bearing a son named Menelik, and Menelik became the emperor in Ethiopia, and that line has been traced all the way to Haile Selassie. I don't know if you've heard that name before. Haile Selassie was the emperor that got overthrown. I want to say it was in the 70s. It could have been the 60s. And then after him, you've had this series of really hard situations, different, communist governments, different governments being taken over, overthrown, a lot of corruption. And I'm not saying that Haile Selassie was perfect or that having the emperor was perfect or anything like that. But what it did was it created a hostile, almost hatred towards this people group because they ruled over them for so long. And I pray that what I'm saying is 100% accurate. I'm not a historian. I'm not a theologian. I always try to preface that. But that is how I've understood the situation to be. And so, for example, there's people from this particular people group that live all over in Ethiopia, and there's certain days where they'll all be killed in these different areas. So they'll call a meeting and they just kill anyone who shows up. They'll say, anyone who's from this group, you have to come to this meeting, and then everyone is killed. And we know about this happening because there might be a couple of people that survive, likely a child whose mother fell on them, and they survived to tell what happened. So it's a very, like I said, very difficult situation.
Would you say, are Christians particularly at risk just because there's also a religious difference, or is it pretty much they're the same as everyone else?
I think they're the same as everyone else, but I do feel like Christians overall are always going to be more at risk because we're doing the Lord's work. We're the enemy's going to be after us.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, I think it's overall just specifically this area and this people group.
Okay, I'm using up a lot of your time. I appreciate your patience. I'm curious.
Oh no, my gosh!
I was curious about, we talk about persecution a lot. I mean, persecution has been part of the Christian experience from the very beginning, from the time that Christ was crucified, in fact. But what is it like where it gets so real? I know I was talking to some friends in Africa, and it was really very difficult for me they seemed so happy and cheerful and, really excited about life, young people. And I'm thinking, not very far to the north, there's a massive civil war and a lot of people dying up there. What is it like for you to know that pretty, in quite close proximity to where you are half the time, actual persecution is going on? In terms of your faith, do you find yourself just doing like everybody else, trying to survive? Does your faith play? I'm sure this is kind of maybe a setup question. It's too easy because, of course, your faith plays a big part in it. But does your faith become in the shadow of persecution, or under the threat of persecution? Does your faith become easier to practice or easier to live out every day, or is it more of a challenge? Would you say, with the real threat of persecution?
Oh, I think it definitely becomes easier. And I think we've seen that throughout history. When people are persecuted, the church is growing. The number of believers are growing. And our area and Ethiopia in general, I feel like the people are so resilient. Like you said, you're talking to them and they're so happy. And you're saying, oh, tell me your story. And sometimes they are just so overjoyed and they're happy to share their story. And we do see quite a bit of tears because the situations are very hard. But it's amazing when these people have such a strong faith that they know that life is short, and they know that every day matters. They know that every moment matters. And I'm just always blown away because we'll see some of our staff. For example, one day one of our staff came in a little bit late, and I said, oh, what happened? And she said, oh, my nephew died last night. And you're just like, that's terrible. He got into an accident, and in Ethiopia they do the burials very quickly because they don't have any way to keep the bodies. And so she had gone to the funeral, and at the same time during lunch and throughout the day, she's still laughing about things that are unrelated that she would normally be laughing about. And it's just always this amazing resilience and strong faith and strong belief that I see through them. Another great example is, when before this area was in conflict, we would often get visitors that would come through, and occasionally they would just hear of Grace Center and they'd say, I want to see what's happening there. And so they would walk through, and they might be from Europe or Australia or New Zealand, someplace like that. And our staff would always say, what do you believe? What's your religion? What do you believe? And many of them would say, I'm atheist. And these are people that they're not connected to us anyway. They just heard about us and they wanted to come see. And our staff would spend the next month talking about how this atheist person, where does their bread come from in the morning? How do they put their feet on the ground when they wake up? How do they get up out of their bed? How do they even live? Because the Bible says, I live and move and have my being, through Jesus Christ. And so they just can't even imagine that your body can even take one step in front of the other if you are really that much against God and believing in God. And so it's very interesting. I kind of laughed to myself. I wonder if this person knew that we talked about them for the next month and prayed for them. And, you have all these people in Ethiopia praying for this European that doesn't know God.
It's such a different, in every way. I was really amused in your book when you talk about, in America, we get all upset when the gas prices get a little high. And you say something like, in Ethiopia, gas isn't coming. It's not even, we don't even have any gas, let alone, So the concerns are so different. And I noticed that when I got to go to visit some of these missions in Tanzania, and things like that are such a big thing to us, like as American traditional Catholics, that's what, we're traditional Catholics, the differences over liturgy and stuff, and you feel like you really have to get ready to fight with people who disagree. In Africa, they're just wide open. I don't know if you've ever seen a traditional Latin Mass or whatever, but my experience was they were really curious about that too. There wasn't any sort of preconceived notions about these things. They were wide open to the Latin Mass. And I thought, I couldn't help but think that Africa, to me, it just seems like such a land of opportunity to bring Christ and to bring the true faith to people who seem so receptive to it, and from whom we can learn so much about sort of natural virtue and receptiveness to Christ as well. I don't know.
Yes, I completely agree. And I watched your interview where you were speaking with the woman from Tanzania, and she was asking the questions about the traditional Latin Mass, and I was just amazed. And we see the same thing. There's just such an openness. There's people just want to learn. Mm-hmm. I feel like so much of Africa in general, they're students, and they kind of remain students their whole lives, and they're excited to learn new things. And there isn't this need to be resistant. I will say that because the Orthodox Church in Ethiopia has been approached so many times by different people coming in and wanting to change them from their religion, they are probably a little bit more leery of, you telling them, well, you don't believe. If someone were to tell them you don't believe in the true God, right, and they would defend it. And so you have that. But when it comes to other things like, the different ways to say Mass, for example, we actually, in our area, it's the Ethiopian rite of the Mass, which is very similar to the Orthodox Church in the area, so that if someone were to come in and walk in, they would realize that this is very similar, mm-hmm. That we believe the same thing with the Eucharist, mm-hmm. and they would be more willing to understand that how similar we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope you'll come back. I want to give you a chance to plug. I have some of your literature here for Grace Center, and I'll certainly put your website on the screen. But I wonder if you could, in your own words, I know people are going to watch this interview and they're going to say, okay, how can I help? Maybe I can go physically or give money or whatever. What would you say? How can people help out your work?
Yeah, absolutely. We rely on partners mainly from the U.S. that partner with us. At this point, during this conflict, it's mainly financial, though we do take volunteers at different times. And they can visit our website, gracecenterfoundation.org. And if they email through the website, the great thing is that on this end of the world, we're very small, so I'll see that. And at this point, I do want to mention a few of the different things that we do at Grace Center, because like I had said, we help everyone who comes to us who's genuinely in need, and that has led to having many different programs. And so one of the things we do is we receive abandoned babies. And we also started a program within Ethiopia for Ethiopian families to adopt children. And this was absolutely unheard of in our area. They just thought that adoption was something that only foreigners did. And we were able to say that adoption is something that God does. And we've seen that become very successful, very similar to here, where people wanted to conceive or they wanted to have children and just weren't able to. And now they have this baby that they knew was meant for them by God. And so we wrote all the protocol and cover all the costs for Ethiopian families to adopt as long as they genuinely want to raise this child as their own. And we do follow-up visits and everything. We also, in Ethiopia, when a mom goes to prison, her children go to prison with her. And one of the reasons these children are in prison is to protect them from being killed in revenge of the alleged crime of the mother. And so we visit all these children. We send them all to schools and do a lot of different things for them. And also, we have our school, we have our feeding program, our daycare. We actually started the first infant daycare in the country because we realized it was a good way to prevent babies from being abandoned. And we just started it because it was a logical thing to do, and then realized a few years in that there was no other program in Ethiopia that was doing that at the time. But that was many years ago. But one of our more recent things was our baby rescue hotline, which is a phone number a woman can call or text when she feels she has no hope and has to abandon her baby. And we're able to talk to her on the phone and basically stop her from abandoning her baby and help them both. And we've seen thousands of lives saved through that. We send out text messages and they respond to that. And so it's just been really amazing to see how God truly has grown what we have done. And it's all been through the help of my wonderful husband, Sefino, and our beautiful kids, and so many other people, 225 staff now that are on the ground running everything. And so we just appreciate everyone's partnership. The money goes a long way in places like Ethiopia. And people who have physically been there have been really amazed to see what God has been able to do there. It's been pretty phenomenal.
Well, that's great. I'm truly humbled. I just think that as a guy who spends a lot of time talking about the need to restore the faith and do the right thing and restore the family, you are an example of just taking the message that our church gives us and just putting it right into action. I really, really mean that. I'm humbled by what you're doing, and it's an honor for me to help out. Hopefully at some point I can come visit your mission and get some pictures and video and promote it even more. As I say, we'll put the information up on the screen, and we can get some 50,000 people that you're. Is that what you said? 50,000 at the moment.
Yeah, it's more than that. We have over 1,000 that come for water every day. That was the other thing. We dug a well for people because they would turn the water off for months at a time, and no one had access to water. So we have the over 1,000 that come for water every day. And so I say 50,000, but it's more than that. We have a couple thousand at our school, and just I think, what were they saying? Is it 12,000 meals a day or something that we serve? And the whole plan is always to keep people from becoming dependent and help them to become self-sufficient. We realize, and I like to say not necessarily self-sufficient, but dependent on God, fully dependent on God, instead of being unable to feed themselves. But a lot of times that starts with providing food. It starts with providing water and very basic things. So, and it's truly an honor to be with you. You're someone that I just always thought of as just a famous person that I've listened to for a number of years now. And so I'm truly honored, and we would love to have you come visit us in Ethiopia.
I hope to do so. And anytime you need any help, or you want to make contact with us again or bring us some reports on something new that happens at your mission, please consider our platform wide open to you at any time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Marcie. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
God bless you.
Thank you, and tell your family, God bless them as well.
I will. All right.